which is very revelatory, as you know, about Meghan and Harry, I got absolutely no help from the palace whatsoever. On the contrary, I think it's mixed. I think that once she saw Meghan when she came to London in 2016, 2018, and she reached out to Victoria to get freebies. And I must say, it's always beyond Meghan. Meghan doesn't believe in reconciliation. Look at her appalling relationship with her father. She's a hard nut.
Meghan left Britain and then did the Oprah Winfrey interview. It's been really poisonous.
Mm-hmm. Well, he does it because he needs a profile. That's the only way they can get money, by showing the profile. And for Netflix, everything is built around the future documentary series to promote the Sussexes.
Meghan has got no real income anymore. She's finished.
Right.
The Netflix series is over. There's no great podcast. They don't generate any money. And I don't see where she is going from here. I think she has a major problem.
Why Meghan?
Well, because she posed a challenge to the royal family, and she's a fascinating person. I mean, she's a person who started from nothing and has become a world global star. And that route to the top has never really been properly reported and examined and investigated. In the trailer, there had 27,000 comments. 95% of them were negative. So they already knew there was a problem of the image. There was also the Vanity Fair article, which is, American Hustle was a huge blow.
We love it. We love to see it.
To Meghan. So it was opportune. And of course, by then she also knew that her brand was in great trouble. Meghan had already recorded their poison for Netflix. It was already edited. All the stuff that we heard today about Charles lying, about William screaming and shouting, was in the can, was being edited.
Tom Bower, where he doesn't go there. But he does go there as far as the fact that they wanted to keep the birth private and all the secrecy around that, and even the fact that...
This story centers on two figures, Meghan Markle and Tom Bower. Put their names together and the picture becomes sharper. Meghan and Harry are well known for legal battles. They have sued newspapers, publishers, and photographers. Court action has often been their first response. So when Bower released Revenge, many assumed the same thing would happen. It didn't. There was no lawsuit, no court order, only vague signals, soft warnings, and quiet talk of legal paths. That silence is important because Bower didn't mock Meghan. He recorded patterns, conduct, influence, and outcomes. Accusations like those aren't defeated by anger, they are challenged with proof, and no proof was ever shown. That's why the lawsuit existed only in theory.
And she reached out to Victoria to get freebies. Victoria was happy to see her clothes on Meghan. Very good looking woman, a duchess. Whatever Meghan was wearing would be an instant sellout. But Meghan had her own way of dealing with people who were trying to use her. She wanted not only freebies, but wanted some sort of payment too, which wasn't allowed under the rules of the royal palace. So that stung Meghan. I think Meghan then got worried, as I tell in the book.
To understand why Meghan never sued, you need to look at what Tom Bower actually revealed. Not emotionally, but structurally. Bower didn't base his book on gossip. He built it on verified behavior. One of the most damaging aspects of Revenge isn't scandal, it's repetition. The same criticisms of Meghan came from unrelated people in different roles at different times with no link to one another. Staff members, ex-friends, industry insiders, palace aides, media figures, separate circles, identical descriptions. Bower showed how relationships often followed a set pattern. Strong charm at first, access and usefulness tied to power, then abrupt withdrawal or conflict once that usefulness ran out.
These are words which he has rehearsed and which he's delivering to make a point, to make his own fortune. And of course the casualty is not only the royal family, but Britain's reputation too. Across the world, it is really quite tragic that he's been allowed and encouraged to make these sort of allegations, which has no evidence. And of course, full of contradictions, dishonest.
That matters legally because patterns don't need intent to be proven, only consistency. Another subject Bower examined carefully was control. Not celebrity, not ambition. Control. Who talks, who stays silent, who gets cut off, who is cautioned, who suddenly vanishes from Meghan's circle. Several people he contacted declined to speak publicly, not because they challenged his account, but because they feared repercussions. Legal trouble, reputational harm, career damage. That fear is not defamatory if it reflects reality. And here's the key point many overlook. Bauer never painted Meghan as helpless or unlucky. He described her as calculated, business-minded, and deliberate about image, rank, and influence. That angle flips the standard victim story completely. In court, that would matter greatly because suing Bauer wouldn't just mean saying this is untrue. It would mean explaining why so many unconnected people told the same story. It would invite questions she couldn't manage. Why did so many friendships end suddenly? Why did staff complaints sound alike? Why were legal threats used so often against critics?
Oh, on the contrary, I think she's a very scheming, very clever woman. No, I think the surprisingly, at the end of the book, I realized how successful she'd been. Here was a woman who was nothing. I mean, born, broken family, the whole thing, unknown actress, all the rest of it, becomes a global star, which is what she wanted.
Why did so many sources avoid public testimony while confirming details privately? A lawsuit wouldn't quiet that. It would magnify it, and that's why the legal threat stayed unclear. This is where things become uncomfortable, not emotionally but legally. If Meghan sued Tom Bauer, the case wouldn't revolve around tone or intent. It would focus on exact statements he made that were carefully phrased, narrowly defined, and extremely difficult to disprove. Without opening doors she has worked for years to keep shut. One of the riskiest areas would be witness credibility. Bauer has repeatedly stated, both publicly and privately, that many sources spoke off the record not because they were dishonest, but because they feared retaliation.
That 2025 was going to be the year of the Markle sparkle. And maybe she would say in the last few weeks, as she's accepting a Humanitarian of the Year award, she might say, see, but for the most part, I didn't see that.
That matters because in a lawsuit, Meghan's lawyers would almost certainly push to identify those people. And that's the nightmare scenario because once a case is filed, Bauer could be legally required to name sources under protected rules. And once identities are known, a court can decide whether those individuals must testify, especially if their statements support the book's accuracy. Now consider what that would expose. Former staff outlining behavioral patterns. Former friends explaining how relationships ended. Industry figures detailing why opportunities quietly disappeared. Royal aides clarifying timelines and internal reactions. Even if Meghan won small points, the process itself would reveal far more than the book ever did. Another danger is records. Bauer's work relies on emails, messages, schedules, third-party verification, and cross-check timelines. He doesn't depend on one account. He layers evidence until conflicts vanish. If Meghan sued, her own records would enter the case. Texts, emails, calendars, contracts, PR discussions, communications with lawyers. Once discovery starts, control disappears. And this is what most people miss. Truth isn't decided by volume, it's decided by what can be confirmed. Bauer never accused Meghan of crimes. He said she acted strategically, controlled perception aggressively, and used pressure as leverage.
Accusation, Oprah Winfrey. Also, I think they're reserving that sort of attack for Meghan's own book, for which we must now look forward in a year's time or something.
Those claims are not defamatory if supported by witnesses, documents, and timelines. So instead, the lawsuit threat lingered, vague enough to scare but never solid enough to trigger exposure. Because once Meghan walks into court against Tom Bauer, she stops directing the story. She starts answering questions. Here's the pattern that gives this story weight. Meghan Markle doesn't avoid lawsuits, she selects them. She has gone to court when the opponent was a newspaper, a publisher, a photographer, an organization with money and predictable legal behavior. Those cases shared one feature: limited fallout. When Meghan sued the media, the issues were narrow. A private letter, copyright, technical violations, procedural mistakes. Those cases focused on content, not character. And that difference explains everything.
To crack, and I think Harry, whereas he's come over, he didn't stay after the funeral, he didn't stay after the coronation. I think he's come because his father clearly asked him to come, but I don't see any sign of forgiveness from the other members of the family for the terrible lies and disloyalty which he's shown.
Because suing Tom Bauer would be a completely different battle. Bauer isn't a tabloid editor chasing clicks. He's an investigative author who expects pushback and writes with that in mind. His books are designed to survive aggressive legal review. Each chapter is built to withstand cross-examination. That's why Meghan's legal strategy stopped short. She can threaten, she can suggest, she can let allies hint that action is being considered, but she can't file because filing changes the rules. A press lawsuit asks, was this private? A defamation case asks, is this true? And that second question is the one Meghan has consistently avoided answering in settings where facts, not emotions, matter. This is why the meltdown narrative exists, not because Meghan is emotional, but because she lost leverage. Tom Bauer didn't attack her, he documented her, and documentation doesn't collapse under pressure. So instead of court, the strategy shifted: undermine the author, criticize his tone, suggest consequences without activating them.
Meghan there with. She's ambitious, she's good looking, she is determined, she succeeded in getting a good script with suits and everything, and in the end she succeeded in getting a man who built her up, who she was looking for all along. But on the other hand, on the way, there were many victims. And I think that the victims are obviously the people I looked for, because she did her very best to prevent her friends and the people she'd worked with.
And wait for public focus to drift elsewhere. But attention didn't drift because people noticed the gap. They saw that Meghan sues almost everyone except the one man who examined her entire trajectory closely. And when audiences see avoidance, they assume risk. When people say Meghan is about to sue Tom Bauer, they usually mean one of four things, and each one hits the same barrier. Reason 1, defamation. This is the obvious argument and the weakest. Defamation requires proving statements are false, harmful, and unsupported. Bauer didn't write in absolutes. He didn't allege hidden crimes or invent secret acts. He described behavior patterns and responses backed by multiple sources. In court, Meghan wouldn't be debating tone. She'd be debating truth, and truth isn't decided by statements. Reason 2, malicious intent. This fails for the same reason. Bauer has a long history of critical biographies. He doesn't single Meghan out. His work on powerful figures follows the same structure. Track ambition, map relationships, follow consequences. Courts don't punish authors for being harsh. They punish them for being wrong. Reason 3, reputational harm. This is where the irony becomes unavoidable. To prove harm, Meghan would need to show a clear decline caused directly by Bauer's book, not by interviews, documentaries, podcasts, or her own words. That's nearly impossible when reputational decline mirrors her own media activity.
Prince Harry and Meghan lying about the Princess of Wales, Catherine. Now, ITV has announced that Prince Harry has taken part in a documentary about phone hacking. I'm just curious to know, is violating someone else's privacy really the hill Prince Harry wants to die on? I mean, has he read the pages of Spare?
Judge would ask the question no PR team wants asked. How do we separate this book from everything else you willingly release to the public? Reason 4, intimidation. This is the unspoken one. The threat itself works as pressure. It warns smaller voices. It discourages debate. It signals caution, but that only works when it seems real. And the longer no lawsuit appears, the weaker the threat becomes. At this stage, filing wouldn't look confident. It would look reactive, not planned, desperate. And desperation is exactly what Meghan has worked hard to avoid projecting. Tom Bauer keeps speaking for one reason. He knows where the leverage points are. He isn't chasing attention. He's signaling certainty. According to people familiar with his work, Bauer has unused material, interviews never published, details held back for legal timing.
She's actually composed again, and never talks about it. I mean, the whole problem she found with this last Vanity Fair issue, the hustle issue, is that she couldn't control the content, and she is somebody who believes, understandably, she's got to control everything down to the last full stop.
That's the leverage, not what he released, but what he didn't. Every calm interview reminds audiences that the file remains open, and Meghan understands that risk. Her silence isn't restraint, it's containment. Because as long as Bauer repeats the same verified facts, the unasked question grows louder. What happens if he decides to reveal more? That's why she wants him quiet. Not erased, just paused. There was a moment, subtle but decisive, when the media calculation changed. For years, editors treated Meghan's legal threats as radioactive. Even a hint of a lawsuit was enough to soften language, remove names, or cancel segments. No one wanted to be the next story about intimidation. Then something changed. Journalists noticed the biggest threat was never followed through. No filing, no case, no discovery, no courtroom, and crucially, no correction forced on Tom Bauer.
Well, absolutely. But of course, the queuing to see the Queen, last respects to the Queen, was very carefully contrived by his media advisors. And isn't it funny how the media got a tip-off just 2 hours after he joined the queue?
Once that pattern became clear, the fear disappeared. Producers began inviting Bauer back on air. Commentators cited revenge openly. YouTubers stopped hedging. Even major outlets started summarizing his arguments instead of dismissing them as controversial. That's when the lawsuit threat flipped from strength to weakness. Because now every hint of legal action raises a new question. Why now after so long? And worse, why didn't you act when the book first appeared? In media logic, timing equals credibility. If you don't sue when damage supposedly occurs, later threats look staged, like an effort to regain control rather than defend truth. By then, the narrative had solidified. Tom Bauer writes things people dislike, but he writes things that last, and people who lie about him don't sue him.
So 2025 was the beginning of something very, very exciting for her, because not least, With Love Meghan was going to appear a few weeks into the new year. And then, of course, it all goes wrong. But on that day, New Year's Day, she could only hope, well, it's a new year, it can only get better.
That isn't sympathy, that's reputation. And once the media stops flinching, leverage disappears. Here's the blunt reality that never shows up in fan defenses. Meghan's lawyers already understand how a case against Tom Bauer would unfold. Not emotionally, not politically, but procedurally. A defamation case in the UK or US would instantly trigger discovery. That's mandatory, that's the cost of court. And discovery is where narratives collapse. Because discovery doesn't care about tone, trauma, or intent. It cares about emails written at the time, internal PR discussions, instructions to agents and intermediaries, messages sent during conflict, timelines that don't bend, and the most dangerous part, discovery works both ways. Meghan wouldn't just review Bauer's notes. Bauer's lawyers would review hers. That includes communications with former friends who later vanished, staff who raised concerns, media figures who were pressured.
Meghan made that accusation, not for Winfrey. Also, I think they're reserving that sort of attack for Meghan's own book, for which we must now look forward in a year's time or something.
Exactly.
But I do think it's very interesting.
Intermediaries used to apply quiet pressure. This is why advisors often shut lawsuits down early, not because the client is wrong, but because the risk is uneven. Bauer's exposure is limited to his research. Meghan's exposure is her entire recent life, documented, dated, and cross-checked by third parties who no longer owe loyalty. And here's what most people miss. Winning doesn't mean escaping damage. Even if Meghan technically won on a narrow point, the testimony alone could reopen stories far worse than anything in revenge. Courts don't hide embarrassment, they record it. That's why advisors don't say, let's sue. They say, let's imply. Because implication preserves control, litigation destroys it. This is where Meghan Markle and Tom Bauer meet in a very specific, very deliberate way. When Meghan hints at legal action, it's rarely about actually going to court. It's about reclaiming authority over a story she feels slipping away. Tom Bauer represents a unique threat to her brand, not a tabloid, not a YouTuber, not a random commentator.
And she has made it. She was in third-rate acting, and she's now a global icon. That isn't success, and she wanted it. She said to her father when she was a young girl, I just want to be famous on the red carpet, and she's made it. But I think on the way, what she's done is damaging. And that's what the book does. It tells the story of a girl who came from a broken family, who struggled very hard, and is, in her terms, has made it.
He's a journalist known for surviving lawsuits, a writer who anticipates legal review before publication. Every line he prints is built to withstand scrutiny. Every claim is framed around sourcing, patterns, and confirmation rather than rumor. That's why he hasn't been sued, and Meghan knows it. So instead, a familiar routine plays out. Anonymous voices suggest legal options are being considered, friendly media frames her as weighing action, vague statements about misinformation and accountability appear. Never a filing, never a case number, never a courtroom. This isn't delay, it's design.
I think what happened was they asked him to put a figure on it, and they thought, let's include that too. This is all conjecture, this is all fantasy, but it's selling his book and selling an attack on the royal family. And of course, he is perfectly safe in Britain. The protection argument has always been used by him to make himself important.
Because talk of lawsuit serves multiple purposes without danger. 1, it scares smaller critics even if it never touches Bauer. 2, it energizes supporters who mistake silence for fear. 3, it reframes the discussion, shifting attention from Bauer's findings to perceived unfairness. 4, it buys time, which is often the real objective. And here's the part people avoid saying. If Meghan sued Tom Bauer, she wouldn't be steering the narrative anymore. She'd hand it to opposing counsel, a judge, transcripts, and public records. That isn't control, it's surrender. So the hints continue. The threats remain unclear. The outrage stays performative. Because without a lawsuit, Meghan can still claim moral authority without stepping onto the factual battlefield. This is the part that matters, and it's the part people keep circling.
He had a purpose when he lived in London and was a member of the royal family. But there he is on the west coast. He can go paddling, he can sit in his garden and smoke. But what else has he got to do?
Tom Bauer didn't challenge Meghan with one explosive allegation. He challenged her with structure, timelines, motive, and documentation that connects choices across years instead of treating them as accidents. What unsettled Meghan Markle wasn't a single passage in revenge. It was the accumulated picture Bauer built, one that removed coincidence and replaced it with intention. Here's what crossed the line for her. When he framed her as commercially calculated, not emotionally reactive. Bauer didn't depict Meghan as overwhelmed by royal life. He portrayed her as someone who understood leverage, titles, access, proximity, and moved fast to monetize and control them. That framing destroys the victim narrative at its core. 2. He documented patterns of pressure, not isolated disputes, staff turnover.
And I must say, it's always beyond Meghan. Meghan doesn't believe in reconciliation. Look at her appalling relationship with her father. She's a hard nut to crack. And I think Harry, whereas he's come over, he didn't stay after the funeral. He didn't stay after the coronation.
Friends who disappeared, advisors who went quiet, people who refused to speak publicly not because they lacked stories but because they feared consequences. One incident can be brushed aside. A pattern cannot. 3. He showed how narrative shifts followed opportunity, not accuracy. According to Bauer's timeline, key truths change based on platform, audience, and commercial moment. That's devastating in court and awkward in public because it suggests crafting, not recollection. 4. He implied restraint, meaning there was more. This is the most dangerous element. Bauer repeatedly indicated that not everything uncovered was publishable. That doesn't mean untrue. It means legal timing, source protection, future confirmation. And everyone, especially Meghan, understands that implication. So when lawsuit talk surfaces, it's not because Bauer crossed a boundary. It's because he drew the map. Once that map exists, every contradiction fits. Every silence looks intentional. Every memory appears curated. And that's why the response isn't a lawsuit, it's damage control. Because suing Tom Bauer wouldn't erase the map, it would place it under oath. And that's the one place Meghan cannot afford to go. Subscribe now because once this moves again, it won't be.